Good morning. Happy Tuesday. I have Neuro Coffee in hand and it is perfect. Already a busy Tuesday. Mentorship calls this morning, big clinic day coming up, so we're going to dive right into the Q&A. And this one comes from Jimmy. And so Jimmy watched the 3 impingements, 3 strategies, 3 solutions video. And at the end of that, if you watch it all the way through, shame on you for not watching it all the way through, there was a little bonus comment about the 4th impingement. And so that's what Jimmy's question is about. He says, I watched your latest video on shoulder impingement and was wondering if you could go into more detail about the posterior internal impingement and how would this presentation usually occur in regards to the archetypes. And so it can present itself in both archetypes. It's going to be a little bit more of a bias towards one for reasons that you'll see. Excuse me. But the thing that we want to recognize that is in common with this is that this is a down pump handle sternum problem in all circumstances. And so basically we just have to look at the archetypes and what their biases may be, and we'll kind of see this. So the easiest one to see is to look at the narrow, and we've kind of looked at this before, where we start with some sort of normal representation, and then the narrow archetype is going to initiate the compensatory strategies with more of a down pump handle situation. So we get a lot of anterior compression through the sternum. What that does is it creates a posterior expansion, relatively speaking. I'm going to grab my shoulder model here for a second. And so we got the backside of the shoulder here. And so what we'll see then is this would be where the dorsal rostral area is. We'll see it turn this way, and we get a compressive strategy right here on the backside of the shoulder. And so that, again, that's why people reach over their shoulder and they point to that area, probably the most accurate test that you'll get. So it's this angulation of the scapula relative to the humerus. So anytime we have that situation, we have the potential for this type of a compressive strategy. For the wide, it's a little bit different because they have to get there with one prior step. So with the wide, when we look at the compensatory strategies, we're typically going to see a dorsal rostral compression first. Under those circumstances, we don't get that angulation of the scapula relative to the humerus, so the internal impingement doesn't really show up too often. However, if we get the next layer of compensatory strategy where we get an anterior compression that follows, and this is a center of gravity issue, so we're trying to maintain center of gravity, so we push back against the sternum, we compress that downward. Now we bring the lateral aspect of that scapula forward to compress against the thorax, and now we can pick up this angulation that we're talking about between the scapula and the humerus that would cause this internal impingement. There's a little bit of a difference here because when we talk about the wides, this will typically show up in somebody that still has the posterior lower expansion of the rib cage. So this is not typically going to show up in an end game presentation. And so where we were talking about the narrow, where we'd have this kind of an angulation, with the wide, they pull this part of the scapula back forward to the thorax, and then there's a little tilt this way. So this is the posterior lower expansion that tilts this on a little bit of an anterior orientation, and then we get the compressive strategy a little bit more superiorly than posteriorly, as we would see in the narrow. Now, in an asymmetrical presentation, we can still get this situation as well. It's going to be very similar to what the narrow kind of looks like because of the turn that's associated with the asymmetrical ISA presentation. We get the posterior expansion on the side. We get the same kind of an angulation as we would see in the narrow. So from a solution standpoint, it's incredibly simple from a conceptual point of view, and that is we got to get the pump handle to come back up. So let's talk about narrows and the asymmetricals because their presentations are very similar, so we can kind of group them together. So they have some posterior expansion posteriorly. And so what we want to do is we want to use a concentric dorsal rostral strategy and push that volume forward into the pump handle to bring it up. So right away, one of the easiest places to put these people is in quadruped. We get a concentric yielding strategy in dorsal rostral, and that's going to provide us with that pump handle situation. We can progressively increase the angle of elevation of the upper extremity as we gain range of motion to make sure that we get the manubrium to move. We need that to move as well, and we get normal rotation around the SC joint. Otherwise, you're still going to have restrictions in the ability of that pump handle to come up, and you still might have some residual symptoms. Once we achieve a certain level of elevation comfortably, now we can start to use cable reaching activities at about 90 degrees of elevation. And what this is going to do, it's going to start to apply a stronger posterior compressive strategy, and again drive that volume forward anteriorly into the up pump handle. So your key performance indicators in this situation is going to be a restoration of shoulder internal rotation as the external rotation will gradually decrease. At this point, we can start to move the shoulder back into external rotation positions and a posterior compressive strategy. So this is where your I's, T's, and Y's fall into play. Your P&F patterns are going to show up here, and then face pulls as well. I'm still a big fan of doing these activities unilaterally rather than bilaterally, because I just don't want to create a pure compressive strategy under most circumstances. There are situations where we may do that, like if we're working with somebody that has to perform a lot of pressing activities, we might utilize that. But again, we also might be sacrificing some other things as a trade-off. When it comes to the wides from a strategy standpoint, we still have to get the up pump handle, but remember that a wide is going to start with dorsal rostral compression before that pump handle gets pushed down. So we want to make sure that we recapture that dorsal rostral expansion first, so we have some air volume in the upper thorax. So if I'm compressed A to P and I don't have any volume there, it's very difficult for me to play that strategy. So if I get dorsal rostral expansion first, now I have some air volume that I can push forward into that pump handle. So I may do that, with any number of dorsal rostral expansion activities. I'm a big fan of doing these things unilaterally as well. So I actually might have to start somebody supine under certain circumstances. So we may do that. Now, here's a little tricky thing. From a symptom standpoint, so we're just talking about the discomfort that's associated with this strategy. If I have a wide ISA, you may have actually heard stories of people saying, oh, I just did a bunch of rows and I got rid of my pain. And that can actually happen. So remember that we're talking about a scapula that is on this anterior orientation. So we've got the lateral aspect of the scapula moving forward, and we've got that little tilt forward that's associated with the posterior lower expansion. If I do what we would consider lat development exercises, so any kind of like pulling activities that would compress the inferior angle of the scapula against the thorax. So I am compressing the lower posterior rib cage intentionally. I can actually tilt that scapula and alleviate the symptom because I reduced the angle here at the glenohumeral joint that was causing the problem in the first place. Now, yes, it's a solution from a pain standpoint, but I also may be sacrificing shoulder range of motion. So you're going to have to make a choice there as to if you want to use that strategy or not. Under some circumstances, it may not be a problem. If I'm a power lifter and I'm concerned about pushing my numbers up on the bench press, this actually might be performance enhancing to a degree and alleviate some shoulder discomfort because I'm not really concerned about maximizing shoulder range of motion. From an athletic standpoint or a gen pop standpoint, might not be the strategy we want to go with. But I just wanted to throw that out there because it does happen, but I don't want everybody to think that it is the solution for every circumstance because it can cause secondary consequences. Jimmy, great question. Thank you for following up on that video. I really appreciate you for doing that. If I didn't answer your question, please ask me another one at askbillhartman@gmail.com. Everybody have a fabulous Tuesday, and I'll see you tomorrow.